Your methods are old and outdated for where we're headed, Riley Quinn said, her voice crisp and clear as crystal. Every department head turned toward me. There was no private meeting, no heads up, just a Monday morning execution in the strategy room of Core Axis Engineering. I kept my face still. My name is Gavin Holt. I'm 46. I've been the director of operations here for 12 years. And exactly 3 minutes ago, I was fired in front of the entire executive team. Effective immediately, Riley continued. We're moving in a more agile, collaborative direction. I closed my laptop without a word. She had been president for 8 weeks, brought in by the investors as part of their transformation strategy. Young, polished, MBA sharp. Her first move was to wear $1,000 suits and drop terms like lean operational synergy. She'd never once visited the distribution floor. I stood up, nodded once, and said, "Understood." Riley flinched slightly, probably expecting outrage, but I wasn't going to give her the drama she needed to justify her decision. I left the room without looking back. No farewell speeches, no eye contact. 23 minutes later, my office was packed. One box for personal items, another for the hard copies that mattered, supplier contacts, delivery flows, pricing architecture, the invisible system I built brick by brick. As I carried them out, Riley appeared at the doorway. "This isn't personal," she said. "We just need someone more adaptable." I said nothing. The quarterly numbers were up 36%. We were outperforming competitors in both margin and reliability. But sure, let's call it rigid. I shook hands with the team on my way out. No resentment. They were good people. Too good for what was coming. On the drive home, I took a detour, parked by the river, rolled down the window and whispered, "She has no idea what she just set in motion." I walked out of Core Axis with 2 boxes and my name badge in my pocket. No security escort, no HR handoff, just silence. The receptionist didn't make eye contact. She'd heard. Everyone had. I slid the boxes into the back seat of my truck and sat behind the wheel without starting it. My hands were still steady, my pulse calm. I wasn't angry, not yet, just still. You don't spend 7 years building something from the ground up without knowing when the walls are starting to crack. Riley thought she'd cleaned house. In her mind, I was a barrier to progress, an outdated system, replaceable. But I wasn't a system. I was the spine. I didn't drive home. Instead, I pointed the truck west and followed the county highway until I hit the ridge above Lockmore Bluff. From there, you could see the whole valley, train tracks, supply yards, barges grinding slow against the Mississippi. I sat on the hood and watched the river fight the current. In my hand, my phone buzzed. Voicemails, messages, missed calls. From Jacob Kim, my assistant. From Miles at Titan Innovations. From a number I didn't recognize but knew came from Valden Components, one of our top suppliers. Word travels fast in this business, especially when the person holding the glue gets yanked out of the mix without a plan. I didn't respond to anyone. Instead, I looked out at the river and whispered to no one, "Let it start." I had built my reputation slowly, handshakes, follow-through, showing up when nobody else did. Riley didn't just fire an operations director. She kicked out the architect and tossed the blueprint. I wasn't going to break things out of spite. I was just going to let them see what happened when I left the table. Core Axis wasn't always Core Axis. When I joined, it was a struggling mid-tier supplier tucked in a crumbling building behind the old rail depot. No one took them seriously, not clients, not competitors, not even the vendors. Dean Marshall, the founder, hired me after a 1-hour interview that started with, "Can you fix a supply chain that's bleeding from the throat?" I told him I'd spent 15 years in the Army managing battlefield logistics. If I could get drones and replacement fuel cells into desert camps with no paved roads, I could get servo motors to Des Moines on a Monday. He handed me a list of vendors, most of whom were on the verge of cutting ties. "Fix this, and you'll have a home here." So I started driving. I visited every critical supplier personally, met wives, shook hands with sons who were learning to run the family warehouse. I learned who ran tight on copper coils, who always needed a 72-hour heads up, who'd bend for me because I remembered their kid's name. I built the system around people, not software. And over time, those people started prioritizing Core Access over bigger names. Because we were reliable. Because I kept my word. Because I listened. By year 3, we had the lowest vendor turnover rate in the region and a 98.2% on-time delivery rate. That wasn't an accident. That was design. What Riley Quinn doesn't understand is that you can't replace trust with an interface. You can't reprogram a handshake. She walked into a machine she didn't understand and started pulling levers, assuming the gears would keep turning. But the gears knew me. And when the gears start slipping, and they will, she'll realize that not everything can be modernized. Some things still run on loyalty. The shift started slow. At first it was subtle. New acronyms in the memos. Consultants roaming the halls. Changes to expense approvals. Riley brought in a firm called Axion Delta to restructure operational throughput. None of them had ever stepped inside a shipping dock. She canceled my quarterly supplier tour, the one trip that kept our partners locked in. Too expensive, she said. We can handle relationship management virtually. I told her we'd lose priority. She smiled like I was speaking Swahili. They'll adjust. We're too important. That was crack number 1. Crack number 2 came during a planning meeting. I raised concerns about modifying our payment terms, net 30 to net 60, for 3 core vendors. Riley brushed it off. If they want our business, they'll play ball. I looked across the table. Half the room was nodding. The other half looked uncomfortable. Nobody spoke up. Crack number 3. I overheard her on a call with one of the investors. Operations is stuck in the past. We need fresh blood. That's when I knew my clock was ticking. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't write any memos defending my performance. I started backing up my systems, vendor contacts, deal history, forecasting models. I printed copies and stored them off-network, not to weaponize, just to preserve what I'd built. I also began drafting personal thank you notes to our top 10 suppliers. Not goodbye letters, just gratitude for their years of partnership. I had a feeling I'd need them again soon. Riley didn't see the soul of the company. She saw charts, benchmarks, profit curves. But I'd seen this playbook before. New leadership, big promises, cut everything that doesn't shine in a spreadsheet. They call it modernization. But what it really does is hollow the place out. No farewell email, no final handshake from Riley. Just silence, like I was never there. But the moment I walked out the door, the silence broke. By the time I hit the bluff an hour later, my phone was pulsing like a heart monitor. First came Jacob Kim, my assistant for 4 years. They didn't even ask me for a handover. Riley just said, "We'll figure it out." Gavin, they have no idea what they're doing. Then Miles Trent from Titan Innovations. "Hey, is it true? I heard from a vendor you're gone. What the hell's going on at Core Access?" I didn't answer, not yet. And then the flood began. 4 voicemails from supplier reps, Midwest Tech, Valden Components, Steelspire, all asking the same thing. Where should we send the next shipment? Who's our contact now? There was no plan, no structure. Riley thought she was removing a cog, not the central gear. At 8:42 p.m., a message came through from purchasing at coreaccess.com. Urgent. We need updated contact information for Valden Components. Their rep says they only deal with Gavin Holt. Please advise. I didn't. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of cold water and a legal pad. No scheming, just clarity. They'd set fire to a system I built with handshakes and follow-ups, check-in calls and vendor dinners. A system too human for their algorithms to replicate. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about watching people who thought they were smarter get humbled by consequences. I hadn't done anything, and already the cracks were showing. The truth is, if you build a machine tight enough, you don't need to sabotage it when you leave. All you need to do is stop turning the wrench. 2 days later, I met Miles Trent for lunch. He picked the place. Chambers Steakhouse, downtown, dark wood and linen napkins. I knew the choice wasn't casual. Miles had something to say, and he wanted me to hear it away from ears and eyes. He was already seated when I walked in, sleeves rolled, sipping water like he didn't have $500 million in annual purchasing power. Chief engineer at Titan Innovations, and the reason Core Access was even on the map these past 3 years. "Glad you came," he said as I sat. Heard what happened. No idea what Quinn's thinking. I smiled. Neither do I. First thing I noticed, he said, cutting into his sirloin. My email to procurement bounced back. Tried calling. Some intern answered, said they'd circle back on our question. Our question was about a $3.2 million order. I didn't respond. I just let him vent. You were the reason we signed, he continued. You didn't sell us. You showed up, walked our floor, sat with our team leads. We trusted you. Now? He shrugged. No trust, just forms. He leaned back. You planning your next move? Exploring, I said. Miles nodded. I mentioned your name to someone. Lena Farrow, CEO over at Terra Novus Labs. They're scaling fast, bleeding from every operational artery. They need someone to fix it. I raised an eyebrow. No agenda, Miles said. Just two old dogs at lunch. But you've still got your bark, Holt, and they need a backbone. I finished my steak in silence, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I already felt the weight of the shift happening. This wasn't about getting even. This was about getting into position. I met Lena Farrow 3 days later in a glass-walled corner office overlooking the city. Terra Novus Labs was buzzing, literally. A prototype drone hovered near the lobby, and teams in lab coats moved like clockwork between departments. Lena stood when I entered. No suit, no show. Just a dark blouse, rolled sleeves, and the kind of energy you only earn after surviving 5 funding rounds. Gavin Holt, she said, shaking my hand firmly. Been hearing your name everywhere. Sit. No small talk. She slid a file across the table. Inside, vendor maps, failure points, order delays, project risk logs. It was chaos in print form. We grew faster than we planned, she admitted. Now our systems are snapping under pressure. We've had 3 missed shipments in 2 weeks. We're hemorrhaging goodwill. I scanned the numbers. Familiar failures, sloppy back-end, disconnected suppliers, zero accountability. You don't need optimization, I said. You need control. Real control. That starts with trust. Lena smiled. That's what Miles said you'd say. She stood and walked to the window. I'll be blunt. I need a director of ops who doesn't need to be handheld. Someone who'll build from scratch, stabilize the supply line, rebuild vendor trust, and make us bulletproof. I met her eyes. You offering a job? I'm offering you authority, she replied. You run this your way. No corporate noise. Fix it and there's equity on the table. It wasn't just a job. It was a blank canvas. And across town, Core Axis was still running blind, trying to force suppliers to follow software instead of instinct. All right, I said. Let's build something they'll regret losing. Lena extended her hand again. Welcome to Terra Novus. I took it, and just like that, I was back in the game. Only this time, I had the blueprint and the freedom. 3 weeks into my new role at Terra Novus, I was already in motion. Site visits, deep dive audits, late nights redesigning workflows. Lena gave me room, and I filled it with order. We were still bleeding, but at least we were bleeding with a tourniquet on. Meanwhile, Core Axis had started hemorrhaging publicly. The first signs came through industry whispers. Shipment delays, someone said on a call. Core Axis used to be reliable. Not anymore. Then a vendor email popped up in my personal inbox. Subject, urgent. Need clarification on Core Axis partnership. Gavin, we received a strange contract amendment from their new team. It contradicts everything we agreed on last year. Just wanted to check. Are you still advising them? I didn't reply. The next day I got a second message, this time from an unfamiliar address. From riley.quinn@coreaxis.com. Subject, quick consultation request. Gavin, hope you're well. We're running into a few transitional issues. Would love to get your input. Happy to compensate you for your time. Please let me know. I read it 3 times. There was a chill in her tone. Not quite panic, but close. The confidence was starting to crack. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on Terra Novus. We were building clean systems, restoring vendor relationships the right way. One call at a time. By week's end, Jacob texted me. She's called 3 emergency meetings. 2 vendors already threatening to walk. Riley's blaming legacy bottlenecks. Nobody's buying it. She was starting to understand. The machine wasn't broken when I left. She just didn't know how to keep it running. And the more she pulled at the levers, the faster it unraveled. The phone rang at 7:12 a.m. I was reviewing inventory audits over black coffee when Jacob Kim's name lit up the screen. I picked up on the second ring. "She's drowning," he said without preamble. "Good morning to you too." Jacob exhaled hard. "Gavin, she's blaming you now, telling upper management you sabotaged vendor relations before leaving." "Did I?" I asked calmly. "You know you didn't, and so do the suppliers." "Then we're fine." "She doesn't know who to call. The Midwest shut off their auto deliveries. SteelSpire bumped lead times by 4 weeks. She tried patching things with that vendor portal her consultants installed. They ignored it." I leaned back. "Let the silence settle," Jacob continued, voice lower now. "She asked me to dig up your old contract language. Said she's looking for violations." "For what?" "To prove you poisoned the well." I smiled slightly. "I didn't poison anything. I just left the garden." Jacob paused. "You still watching all this from the sidelines?" "Absolutely." He chuckled, but it wasn't a happy sound. "It's wild. I used to think you were over-prepared, over-documented. Now it's the only thing holding their back end together, and you're not even there." I sipped my coffee. "Tell me one thing, Jake." "Yeah? Is she afraid?" A beat. "Yeah," he said, "but she's too proud to show it. She's calling vendors herself now. They're not picking up." I ended the call shortly after, then walked to the window of my new office. Below, the Terra Novus floor was humming, controlled, steady. Across town, Core Axis was on fire, and the person who lit the match was calling it sabotage. But the truth? Riley Quinn had never learned that silence from the right person can echo louder than any scream. The message was short. From Andrea Lyle. Subject: coffee, 1 hour, discreet location. Andrea had been Core Axis's head of finance for years. Quiet, exacting, apolitical. The kind of person who tracked every decimal but never got caught in gossip. We met at a small cafe on 4th. No suits, no fanfare. She looked tired, the kind of tired that lives in your bones when you've been fighting a losing battle for too long. "I'm not here on Riley's behalf," she said as soon as we sat. "She doesn't even know I contacted you." I nodded, letting her speak. "They're blaming you," Andrea continued. "The delays, the lost contracts, the vendor issues. She's told the board it's sabotage." "It's not." "I know, but that's not why I reached out." She pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me. A spreadsheet loaded. Columns of projections, cost reductions, supplier targets. "They didn't fire you for your leadership style," Andrea said quietly. "They fired you because you were the only one who would have pushed back against this." I scanned the numbers. They were trying to squeeze an additional 12% from the supply chain without adjusting volume or timelines. "That's not sustainable," I said. "Not unless they outsource or start cutting corners." "Exactly. And Riley's already exploring both." I stared at the sheet. "So that's why it was public." A message, Andrea nodded. "They needed to scare the rest of us into silence." "And did it work?" "For most, not for me. I resigned yesterday." I leaned back. "Next week's board meeting," she added, "they'll vote on closing the St. Paul facility and moving production to Mexico. 200 jobs gone." She stood to leave. "I just thought you should know what you were protecting, even when they couldn't see it." And just like that, I realized this wasn't just a downfall, it was a gutting. I drove the long way home that evening, windows down, mind quiet. Andrea's words circled in my head, not just about the layoffs or the sabotage accusation, but the simple truth behind them. I was removed because I would have said no. Not emotionally, not politically, just practically. No to unrealistic targets. No to slashing vendor rates that barely held during shortages. No to gutting the people and partnerships we spent years building. They didn't want a director of operations. They wanted a rubber stamp, and I'd never been one. The funny thing? I still wasn't angry. I'd already processed that the day I was fired. Already watched the signs form weeks earlier, the consultants, the spreadsheet jargon, the hollow smiles and strategy sessions. But now I saw the full picture. They weren't just mismanaging Core Axis. They were draining it for short-term performance so they could flip it like a distressed property. And Riley? She was just the hammer, a polished, educated, photogenic hammer, used to break open the foundation. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the lights off and a legal pad open. I wasn't planning revenge. That's never been my style. But I was beginning to sketch the shape of something else. Recovery, not just for me, not just for the systems I built, but for the people they were about to discard. The warehouse leads, the fulfillment managers, the line workers in St. Paul who kept things running through every crisis. They deserved better. And now I had leverage, a growing company, a clear field, and first-hand knowledge of what would collapse next. I wasn't going to throw punches. I was going to catch what fell. Lena called me into her office late Friday. She had a document in one hand and a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We just secured a 6-month contract with ArcLight Labs," she said, handing me the signed agreement. "Your work's already turning heads." I skimmed the deal. Logistics, vendor terms, milestones. Tight, clean, sustainable. "That's good," I said. She folded her arms. "Now let's talk about something bolder." I looked up. "Core Axis," she said simply. It caught me off guard for a moment, hearing it said aloud. I hadn't brought them up once since I signed on. Hadn't needed to. "They're bleeding," Lena continued. "Vendors talking. Clients pulling orders. Half your old networks pinging us behind closed doors." "Not surprising," I said. "I know you're not the type to gloat, Gavin, but let me ask you this directly. Are they worth acquiring?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my drawer, pulled out a black notebook, the same one I'd used to draft contingency ideas the week I left Core Axis. I slid it toward her. Inside, a full operations map of Core Axis. Facilities, people, strengths, weaknesses. "They're worth saving," I said, "but not in their current state. If they collapse, they'll sell cheap. We'd gain infrastructure, brand equity, and a trained workforce, all for pennies on the dollar." Lena raised an eyebrow. "And Riley?" "She won't be part of the deal." She smiled, satisfied. "Let's explore it," she said. "Quietly. Use back channels. No public movement until we see how far they fall." I nodded. For the first time since I walked out of Core Axis, I saw the endgame forming. Not revenge, not sabotage, just a clean transfer of stewardship, from people who broke it to people who actually understood its worth. Within 2 weeks, the silence turned into noise. Every day a new update. Jacob texted, 3 more client complaints, fulfillment errors. Riley's team has no clue how to respond. Andrea emailed a single line. "They're slashing budget again." No answers, only panic. And then came the industry whispers. Core Axis was unreliable, off balance, a sinking ship without a captain. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, kept building at Terra Novus. No social posts, no interviews, just clean systems and growing trust. Until one evening I got a voicemail from Riley. Her voice, once for steel, now glass. "Gavin, I know things ended abruptly. We're experiencing vendor disruptions. Several clients are questioning delivery timelines. I'd appreciate a short call, off the record. Even 5 minutes would help." She didn't sound angry. She sounded afraid. I didn't call back. Instead, I met with Lena and Dean Marshall, yes, that Dean, at a downtown restaurant. The man who'd once hired me to fix Core Axis's chaos was now leaning across a table asking, "How bad is it really?" "Worse than they admit," I said. "But that's the opportunity." Lena nodded. "You still have contacts on the board?" Dean smirked. "Of course. I kept 15% after the sale, enough to get a foot in the room." Lena looked to me. "If we move, we need access. Inside leverage, quiet reach." Dean tapped the table. "Let me test the waters. If they're bleeding, they'll talk numbers fast." I raised my glass. "Do it. Just don't mention Terra Novus. Or me." That night, I walked through Terra Novus's main floor. Clean, organized, alive. Core Axis was collapsing under its own weight, and all I'd done was step aside and let gravity do the rest. It was a Thursday when Miles Trent walked into Terra Novus unannounced. No calendar invite, no warning. Just him, leaning on my office doorframe with that quiet engineer's frown. "Got lunch?" he asked. 10 minutes later, We were at a corner deli near the river. Same booth where we'd first talked weeks ago. Only this time, his expression was more serious. "We're done with Core Axis," he said, biting into his sandwich. "We tried, but 3 missed deliveries, 1 botched order, and 2 different account managers in 3 weeks?" I just listened. "You kept our trust," Miles said. "They buried it." He leaned in. "I came here because we need a supplier now, a real one. We know Terra Novus doesn't manufacture the same robotics components yet, but what if you did?" I set my sandwich down. "You're saying—" "I'm saying we're ready to commit. A 3-year supply contract, priority pricing, volume guarantees. Enough to justify a new production line." I didn't answer right away, because this wasn't just a deal, it was leverage. With Titan Innovations on board, any acquisition of Core Axis became 10 times more valuable. Not just a rescue play, a launch pad. "We'd need infrastructure," I said. "Specialized capacity." "You'd need Core Axis," Miles replied. The words hung there. By the time I got back to the office, I had a full proposal drafted for Lena. She read it silently, flipped through every page, then said one thing: "Make the call to Dean. Let's move." That night, I called Dean Marshall. "Tell them there's a buyer," I said. "Private, discreet. They'll keep the lights on, if the price is right." Dean paused. "You ready for this, Gavin?" I looked out the window at the humming Terra Novus floor. I've been ready since the day they thought I was replaceable. 3 days later, Dean called back. "I floated the offer," he said. "Told them a private buyer's interested in acquiring Core Axis, quietly before the next earnings call." "And?" "They bit," Dean said. "Harder than I expected, barely negotiated. They want out." I leaned forward in my chair. "Did they ask who the buyer is?" "They asked. I played it off. Told them a private group looking for vertical integration. They didn't push. Too desperate." I exhaled slowly. Core Axis wasn't just bleeding. It was trying to crawl into the ambulance before the sirens. "Next step?" I asked. "I told them we'd send preliminary terms by end of week," Dean replied, "but they're already hinting at expedited closing before quarter end." I hung up and walked straight into Lena's office. "They're ready," I said. "We need to finalize numbers, assets, workforce, liabilities, everything." Lena turned to her whiteboard and started writing. In 30 minutes, we had a draft outline: retain core operations, absorb 80% of staff, secure all facilities, sunset Riley's role entirely, rebrand post-acquisition with Terra Novus synergy. "You'll oversee the integration?" she asked. "Every inch." We worked late into the night. I redrew the supply chain model from scratch, mapping Terra Novus and Core Axis into one seamless flow. No waste, no overlap, just pure precision. The next morning, I checked my inbox. A message from Riley. Subject: urgent request, vendor transition support. I didn't open it. Instead, I emailed Dean. "Confirm readiness. We're prepared to sign within 10 business days. Let them know it's their last, best offer." It wasn't personal. It was structural. Core Axis was never mine to destroy, but I'd built it once, and I knew exactly how to rebuild it stronger. This time, under the right hands. The deal was structured in 3 days flat. Lena pulled together legal, finance, and integration leads. I mapped out every operational overlap and strategic fit. Dean handled the investor communications, keeping Terra Novus and my name out of it until the ink dried. We weren't just buying a company. We were absorbing its muscle, keeping the best of its bones, and discarding the rot that had set in over the last 6 months. Core Axis still had strong assets: 2 factories, robust tooling, and skilled teams. What it lacked was leadership, trust, and direction. That's where we came in. The final terms were surgical. Core Axis would be acquired under a new Terra Novus division. 85% of the original workforce would be retained. All legacy contracts would be reviewed and restructured. Riley Quinn's position would be terminated immediately. Dean would retain a symbolic stake to represent continuity. And I would oversee the full integration process as Chief Operations Officer. I signed the internal paperwork that Thursday evening. As my pen lifted from the final page, Lena looked across the table and asked, "Are you ready for Monday?" I nodded. I've waited 3 months for this. She leaned back, thoughtful. We're doing more than saving a company, Gavin. We're restoring something worth preserving. She was right. This wasn't just about pride. It was about protecting everything that was nearly lost. People, systems, partnerships, and proving that what we built still had value in a world that only chased the new. The meeting was set, Monday morning, Core Axis headquarters, 9 a.m. Exactly 3 months to the day since Riley Quinn fired me in front of a room full of executives. This time I wouldn't be carrying a box. I'd be holding the keys. I chose a charcoal suit. Crisp, no flash. Quiet power. It wasn't about showing off. It was about showing up. At 8:57 a.m., I stepped through the glass doors of Core Axis headquarters for the first time in 90 days. 3 months ago, I left with 2 boxes and a silent promise. Now I returned with ownership. I walked through the lobby flanked by Lena Farrow and our legal team. Dean Marshall met us at the elevator, nodding once. He didn't need to say a word. We stepped into the conference room right at 9 o'clock. Riley was already seated. She looked up and froze. First confusion, then dread. Her lips parted. What is this? Dean cleared his throat calmly. Ms. Quinn, I'd like to introduce you to the acquiring party. She looked to Lena, then to me. Her voice cracked. You're kidding. This is Gavin Holt, Dean said. He will be overseeing the integration process moving forward. You can't? He's the reason we're in this mess. The lead investor, a thin man named Philip Bray, stood. We've reviewed that claim. There's no evidence Gavin contacted a single vendor post-departure. The decline was operational, not personal. Riley turned to me. You set me up. I met her gaze. Calm. Even. I didn't lift a finger. I just walked away, and your system unraveled itself. She stood. You think you've won? This isn't about winning, I said. It's about restoring what never should have been broken. Lena stepped forward. Ms. Quinn, your services won't be needed during or after the transition. The silence that followed was loud. Riley gathered her papers. Her hands were shaking. You planned this from the start, she whispered. No, I replied. You did. When you removed the foundation and expected the roof to hold. She left without another word, and just like that, the room belonged to us. The moment Riley left the boardroom, the air shifted. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief. It was release. Like the pressure had finally dropped after months of quiet collapse. Philip Bray, the lead investor, adjusted his glasses. Let's proceed with the remaining agenda. He didn't spare a glance for the empty chair Riley had occupied. The acquisition terms were confirmed. Ownership transferred. Key staff would be retained. Terra Novus would inherit facilities, contracts, and obligations. But under our leadership, not hers. And me? I would be returning, not as an employee, but as the hand steering the future of a company they nearly destroyed. After the meeting, as we gathered our folders, Riley appeared in the hallway. Her face was pale but set in steel. You sabotaged everything, she hissed. You pulled strings, burned bridges, made me the scapegoat. I didn't blink. I haven't spoken to a single vendor since the day you fired me, I said calmly. But I didn't need to. They saw what you valued and what you didn't. She shook her head, furious. You waited in the dark and let it all collapse. No, I corrected. I gave you space to prove your version could work. It didn't. She laughed bitterly. What? Now you're the savior? I'm just rebuilding what we both let fall. Only this time, I'll do it without the blind ambition. She turned and walked away. No goodbye, no acknowledgement. Just the silence of someone who finally understood the cost of underestimating what they couldn't see on a spreadsheet. Later that evening, I stood in the now quiet main operations bay. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was restoration. This wasn't about replacing her. It was about recovering everything she carelessly discarded. And next, we'd begin rebuilding, not just stronger, but smarter. We reopened under the name Terra Axis Labs, a quiet fusion of past and future. No balloons, no press release, just the hum of machines spinning back to life under steady hands. We retained 185 of the original 200 employees, Some had already handed in resignation letters before the acquisition. Most tore them up the next day. People smiled again in the hallways. They weren't celebrating my return. They were relieved that the chaos had stopped. In the first week, we reactivated direct supplier communications. No portals, no impersonal forms, real phone calls, real voices, real commitments. Jacob Kim was promoted to Senior Operations Coordinator. Andrea Lyle rejoined as Head of Financial Strategy. She said she hadn't realized how much the mission mattered until she watched it almost disappear. And the vendors? They returned without hesitation. Valden Components reinstated priority shipping. Midwest Tech lowered pricing back to our original terms. Titan Innovations signed the 3-year agreement Miles had promised. Our production stabilized within 3 weeks. By week 6, we were running at 120% capacity, filling both Terra Nova's contracts and legacy core access orders with precision and trust. The new systems blended Gavin Holt's blueprints with Terra Nova's innovation. And it worked. Lena kept her promise. I became a minority equity holder in Terra Access. Skin in the game. Voice in every decision. We weren't chasing growth. We were building legacy. In a world addicted to disruption, we chose something different. Discipline. One day as I was walking the floor, Brian, the new production manager, handed me a tablet. Valden just confirmed the next 6-month schedule, he said. They appreciate going back to the old way of doing business. I smiled. Let's visit them next month, in person. Because that's how you build something that lasts, not by burning it down, but by showing people why it mattered in the first place. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of the Terra Access floor, clipboard in hand, coffee cooling in the other. The hum of progress surrounded me. Robotic systems being assembled beside precision lab components. The new hybrid product line we'd launched from scratch. We were on track to hit $20 million in revenue, nearly double what Core Access had peaked at. More importantly, we'd built it the right way. No shortcuts, no flashy gimmicks, just systems that worked and people who were valued. I took the long walk through the main corridor, greeting line leads by name. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a ritual, a reminder of how you hold a place together, not from above, but beside. That afternoon, Dean Marshall dropped by my office. He leaned on the doorway, wiping oil from his hands. He'd just come from tuning up his old motorcycle. You proved your point, he said with a smile. Built it back better than before. I looked up from a set of reports. Wasn't about proving a point. Dean smirked. Sure, Gavin, whatever helps you sleep at night. After he left, I stared at the old photo on my shelf. Me, Jacob, Andrea, and 2 line managers from 4 years ago, back when we still called it Core Access. So much had changed, and yet the core never had. That evening I drove to Lockmore Bluff, the same spot I sat after Riley fired me. Only this time, I wasn't watching the river wondering what was next. I was standing in what came after. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like fire or fury. Sometimes it's building something so steady, so undeniable, that those who underestimated you are forced to watch it thrive, without ever being invited back in. And that's enough. That's more than enough.